Evening from wherever you are joining us today. My name is Camille Pottinger, and I serve as a health specialist within the Division of Neuroscience here at the National Institute on Aging. I am joined by my colleague today, Dr. Dallas Anderson, who's a program director within the Division of Neuroscience, Population Studies and Genetics branch. I would like to invite you to the Minority Health and Health Disparities in Neuroscience webinar series. This series highlights opportunities for NIA grantees and other interested individuals to share their research advances, lessons learned, and opportunities in this field. Before introducing the speakers for today, I would like to let you know that at the end of the presentation, we will allow time for questions. Please submit your questions and comments in the Q&A box rather than the chat box. And Dr. Anderson will ask on your behalf. Any questions we do not get to, please feel free to reach out to the speakers directly. Additionally, this webinar is being recorded, and we will send out a copy of the recording to all of the attendees within the next week or so. So let's get started. It gives me great pleasure to introduce these next set of speakers for the series, Dr. Laura Zahodny and Dr. Christine Ajrouche. The title of their presentation is Toward More Inclusive ADRD Research, Engaging with Middle Eastern North African Older Adults in the U.S. Dr. Zahodny is a clinical neuropsychologist and an associate professor of clinical science in the Department of Psychology at the University of Michigan. She is also co-director of the Michigan Center for Contextual Factors in Alzheimer's Disease, a research center for minority aging research funded by NIA. She trained in clinical neuropsychology at the University of Florida, Brown University, and Columbia University. Dr. Zahodny's externally funded research program aims to understand how life course psychosocial experiences influence late life cognitive trajectories, the expression of neurodegenerative disease, and racial ethnic inequalities in Alzheimer's disease. Her research group collects longitudinal biopsychosocial data from large representative and diverse cohorts, including the Michigan Cognitive Aging Project, Washington Heights Inwood Columbia Aging Project, and the Detroit Area Wellness Network, in order to guide policies and interventions to reduce late-life cognitive morbidity and advance health equity. We will also be joined today by Dr. Christine Ajrouche, who is a research professor in the Research Center for Global Dynamics at the Institute for Social Research at the University of Michigan, where she co-directs the Michigan Center for Contextual Factors in Alzheimer's Disease. A gerontologist and fellow of the Gerontological Society of America, she adopts a life course perspective to the study of social relations and health. Dr. Ajrouche's findings have been published in high-impact journals, including the Journal of Gerontology, Social Sciences, Developmental Psychology, and Advances in Life Course Research. Her research has focused for over 25 years on Middle Eastern, North African, Arab American populations, beginning with ethnic identity formation among adolescent children of immigrants, followed by the study of aging and health disparities. Dr. Ajrouche's current work is funded by NIA, where she addresses social aspects of Alzheimer's disease. These projects seek to establish prevalence levels of AD among older adults of Middle Eastern, North African descent, compared to Blacks and whites in the Metro Detroit area by collecting biomarkers, social and cultural data, and neuropsychological assessments. With that, I would like to turn it over to our speakers for today's presentation. Thank you so much.
So thanks again, Camille, and thanks to Dr. Martin, Dr. Anderson, and the Minority Health and Health Disparities in Neuroscience webinar series committee. It's really an honor to have been invited to this great series and to have this opportunity to discuss our interdisciplinary research program focused on older adults in the U.S. I'm going to turn things over first to Dr. Ajrouche, who will get us started today.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Zahodny. And I also would like to thank everyone for this opportunity to be able to share our research with a wider audience. We're really excited about what we've been doing and look forward to sharing with you our progress so far and to engaging in discussion afterwards. I'm going to start off by providing an overview of what we hope to cover this afternoon in our time together. So first, we're going to define MENA and provide some background as to why including this racialized ethnic group provides a unique opportunity to advance the science around cognitive aging. Then we'll discuss the need for good translated measures in the cultural adaptation process and present the process by which we adapted cognitive assessments. Next, we present an overview of our quest to obtain population representative data of MENA older adults in the Detroit Aging and Memory Project, as well as our quest to ensure comprehensive biomarker data in the Healthy Brain Project. Finally, we will end with a brief description of MCFAD, which is our Alzheimer's disease RICMAR. This center seeks to ensure that underrepresented populations, including MENA, are both trained in the social and behavioral study of ADRD, and that those populations are included in studies that seek to address health disparities to ultimately move the field forward in terms of our knowledge around Alzheimer's disease and related dementias. Next slide, please. Beginning with the topic of cognitive health disparities, I'm sure many who are listening to this webinar are very well aware that Alzheimer's disease and related dementias afflicts more than 6 million people in the United States. Every 66 seconds, someone develops this disease, and 1 in 3 older adults die with Alzheimer's disease or related dementia. However, what is also quite evident is that Alzheimer's disease and related dementias is not randomly distributed. Racial and ethnic minoritized groups suffer greater prevalence and incidence of ADRD. So we know, for example, that among groups racialized as Black or African American or Hispanic Latino tend to report higher prevalence and incidence of Alzheimer's disease compared to the white population. However, what we don't know are what the rates are among Middle Eastern and Arab American older adults in the US. So who are MENA Americans? MENA is the short acronym for Middle Eastern and North African. And the question often arises as who are MENA and why do they matter? So I'd like to start by recognizing that defining racial and ethnic groups is always a challenge because it asks us to indicate boundaries. What makes someone white, Black, Hispanic, or MENA? Social science generally understands that these categories are socially constructed, not a biological fact. But these categories are a very powerful social fact that have a lot of implications for stratification and inequalities. The definition that we use in our research of MENA Americans is that it refers to anyone with ancestry to an Arabic-speaking country. In this way, it mirrors the definition of Hispanics because it's language-based, and it becomes a pan-ethnic categorization that includes people from 22 different countries, various religions, including Muslims and Christians, as well as an array of ethnicities that have long lived in Arabic-speaking countries, such as Chaldeans, Assyrians, and Kurds. MENA American, then, is a term that encompasses individuals who trace their ancestries to a diverse number of national origins, ethnic groups, and religious affiliations. Now, up until March of this year, the Office of Management and Budget legally classified MENA as simply white. There's a long history behind that, and if you have questions, we can talk about that later. But growing evidence suggests that MENA American experiences do not mirror overall the white experience, inferring that the study of MENA Americans may provide unique insights into theoretical and applied initiatives. MENA is an emerging category now to be included in required reporting on racial and ethnic statistics in the United States. The Office of Management and Budget definition is a bit broader. Their definition of MENA is a bit broader than the definition we use because it includes the non-Arab countries of Iran and Israel. Nevertheless, evidence suggests from preliminary analyses that uses the National Health Interview Survey that defining the population as MENA or Arab results in the same findings with regards to health and health behaviors. So next slide, please. So just to give you a little bit of the migration history of MENA Americans, MENA Americans began coming to the United States in the early part of the 20th century, early 1900s, along with many Europeans, and their narratives for migration mirror European migrant stories, many often looking for economic opportunity. Those who came to the US from the MENA region were primarily of Syrian and Lebanese origins. Effectively, in 1924, immigration from most parts of the world, with the exception of Western Europe, was halted by an act that was passed by Congress, and it effectively stopped immigration from 1924 until 1965, when the laws changed again. Now, when the laws changed again, immigration from the MENA region resumed, whereas immigration from Europe did not resume at the same levels. But this time, the reasons for immigration were a little bit more complicated. A lot of regional turmoil and political instabilities pushed people out of the region, leading to increased immigration rates. And regions of origin expanded beyond Lebanon and Syria to include Egypt, Palestine, Yemen, and Iraq. In particular, Southeast Michigan is home to the largest, most visible concentration of Arab Americans in the nation. In 1990, they comprised less than 1% of the population in Michigan, and over the last 30 years have tripled to now represent 3% of the state's population. Metro Detroit was initially a draw due to the job opportunities in the auto industry, and then after that, it became a destination preference given the established community infrastructure. So just to give you a little bit of a snapshot of more recent immigration, between 2000 and 2022, the immigrant population from the MENA region doubled from about 500,000 to over 1 million. And this represents a little less than 3% of the total US foreign-born population as of 2022. Next slide, please. So with MENA populations growing in the US, attention to ADRD risk and disparities was motivated on our part by two factors. First of all, documented health risk factors for ADRD, including cardiovascular disease and diabetes, are more prominent among the MENA population. And this reflects patterns that we see with other prominent minoritized groups in Metro Detroit, that of Black Americans. So a comparative perspective will help to sort out the social and contextual factors that increases risk. Second, research on cognitive health among the Middle Eastern and Arab American older adult population is virtually non-existent. And this is due to the lack of translated cognitive measures and the lack of normative data, as well as researchers' limited access to a large population, which is hard to identify. Next slide, please. And so just to give you a little bit more insight into the risk factors, we know that markers of inequality are a prime concern in the study of ADRD risk, especially those related to SES or socioeconomic status. So using the American Community Survey, which is one of the few data sources we have that allows us to identify those of MENA ancestry, we were able to look at the national level what MENA Americans look like compared to non-Hispanic whites. And what you can see is though MENA Americans report, high college education on average, a little bit lower poverty than non-Hispanic whites, slightly higher unemployment rates, they do report significantly high proportion who have less than a high school education. And that's important to note because it suggests a bifurcation of the population, with a large segment of the population doing quite well, but clear pockets of vulnerability. And then when we look more locally in the Metro Detroit area, we compare MENA Americans to Blacks and whites, we can see that MENA Americans report the highest levels of those with less than a high school education, almost twice as many as Blacks and almost 3 times as many as whites. So again, what's interesting here is almost a similar level of those with college and less than a high school, again, really illustrating the bifurcation with regards to the socioeconomic profile of the MENA American population. The takeaway point here is that MENA patterns of socioeconomic status are not similar to whites and further may vary by region. Next slide. So MENA populations have, for the most part, been invisible in aging and health disparities research. But this is a rapidly aging population. If you look at the Metro Detroit area, among those who are MENA American, 11% are age 60 and above. It's very similar to the general population in Metro Detroit, which is a signal that attention to this population needs to be had. Most nationally representative data classifies MENA as white, as I've mentioned earlier, and so the data sources are far and few between. How have researchers done their study of MENA populations? Well, one way is to do community studies, to partner with community organizations, and these have yielded very insightful information about disease and social factors, but they lack generalizability. Representative samples are available through two sources, the National Health and Interview Survey and the US Census, but both of these have limitations as well. First of all, they're considered to be undercounts because for the National Health and Interview Survey, we only are able to identify immigrants. They have a question on there that asks place of birth, and then they have a code for the Middle East, North African region. And in the US Census, they're able to be identified through the ancestry question, which is a write-in. Oftentimes, as those of you who are familiar with survey research know that when people have to write something, they oftentimes skip it if they can't just check off a box. So oftentimes the numbers that are reported by the census are considered to be an undercount, but moreover, even though it allows us to look at US born and foreign born, very limited measures, especially with regards to health. In sum, then, a major challenge has been a lack of good measures for those of us who are committed to and dedicated to advancing knowledge about ADRD risk and disparities. So I'm going to turn the screen over now to Dr. Zahadny.
Thanks. So as you've heard, one of the challenges in the meaningful inclusion of MENA older adults in ADRD research is limited availability of appropriate measures. So I'm going to share with you now some of our work to address this challenge with the goal of measuring cognitive health similarly across English and Arabic speaking MENA older adults, as well as across MENA older adults and other racial and ethnic groups. So let's start with the MoCA, because many of you might know there is an Arabic version of the MoCA on the MoCA Cognition website. But this translation had not been validated in Arabic-speaking older adults in the US. And in reviewing this instrument, we noted that there were several differences that could influence the comparability of English and Arabic versions in a linguistically diverse sample like the one we would be working with. So for example, in addition to replacing some of the language and memory stimuli, this version also reduced the number of targets in the vigilance task. Still, other modifications to the Arabic and MoCA have been made by researchers in Saudi Arabia, in Egypt, and in Lebanon, swapping out not only words in the word list, letters in the vigilance task, but also images in the cube copy and picture naming tasks, and letter category in the verbal fluency task. So all of these adaptations demonstrate the importance of dialectical variations and differing national contexts. But importantly, translations and adaptations appropriate in the Arab world may not be optimal for Arabic speakers in the US context, who, as we just heard, are incredibly diverse in terms of national origin, ethnicity, and dialect. And further, we wanted to maximize comparability between English and Arabic versions, as not all Arab Americans speak Arabic or feel most comfortable being tested in Arabic. So we set out to create an Arabic version of the MoCA for use in the diverse US context, along with a larger neuropsychological battery that's being used in the Detroit Aging and Memory Project that we'll be talking about later. So grounded in core principles of cross-cultural adaptation, we applied a modified version of the facet translation method. We recruited translators who are proficient in the Arabic dialects of the most prominent national origin groups found in the US generally, as well as Southeast Michigan specifically, including Lebanese, Iraqi, and Yemeni. Two of these individuals independently translated the measures from English to modern standard Arabic, which allows for the assessment of cognitive function across dialects and across geographical spaces. And this forward translation captured meaning over a literal word-for-word translation. Next, the translators and study team, including a researcher fluent in both Arabic and English, met to reconcile the two forward translations by choosing the better of the two for each item and resolving any discrepancies between them. A third bilingual translator then back translated this reconciled version. The study team then reviewed the back translation for discrepancies from the source versions, and in the case of the MOCA, to assess equivalence with the Arabic version on the MOCA Cognition website. And finally, while modern standard Arabic is appropriate for a written translation, it's not commonly used in face-to-face conversation. So we also created audio recordings of the battery being administered in multiple dialects, those dialects that we knew would be most represented in the study population, including the Levant and Gulf dialects. And these dialect recordings were used in tandem with the written modern standard Arabic translations to train examiners and to ensure standardization in a real-world context. So we next conducted a pilot study to examine whether the Arabic measures were sensitive to dementia. We recruited a convenience sample of 33 Arabic-speaking immigrant adults aged 65 and above living in Metro Detroit using established community contacts, including social service organizations, religious institutions, and hospital systems. 8 of those individuals were identified as having been diagnosed by a physician with mild to moderate ADRD. And here I'm showing results for the MOCA. So items here are ordered in terms of the magnitude of the difference between individuals with and without ADRD. So those items showing the largest group differences are toward the top, and items with the smallest group differences are toward the bottom. So you can see at the very bottom, all 33 respondents correctly identified the camel picture. So there was no group difference on that item. But for all other items, respondents with an ADRD diagnosis scored lower than respondents without a diagnosis on average, including 5 items for which none of the respondents with a diagnosis gave correct responses. Those were both abstraction questions, cube copy, trail making, and verbal fluency F. After adjusting for age, education, and gender, the largest group differences were found for 4 of the orientation items, month, day, year, and city, the 2 abstraction items, cube copy, and serial 7s. So this was encouraging to us that these Arabic translations were indeed sensitive to dementia in the community. After this initial pilot testing, launching of the face-to-face Detroit Aging and Memory Project was delayed due to COVID, but we obtained an administrative supplement to continue our work during the pandemic. Specifically, we conducted a telephone study where we were able to administer a handful of verbal measures, including CRAD word list learning, animal fluency, and some items from the MOCA. And there we aim to recruit 600 older adults, evenly distributed across MENA, Black, and white subgroups. MENA participants here completed the measures in their preferred language, either English or Arabic. So I'm going to show data for those 2 MENA subgroups separately. So here are our descriptives for the final sample. As you can see, white participants were slightly older than the other groups. Both white and Black groups had a larger proportion of women. Interestingly, all English-speaking groups had similar levels of education, but Arabic speakers had less education than the other three groups on average. And despite their older age, white participants reported better health than all the other groups in these unadjusted analyses. So our first analysis with these data sought to evaluate the invariance of the telephone cognitive battery across racial and ethnic groups, so MENA, Black and white, as well as across language groups, Arabic and English. And we were interested in both measurement invariance to determine whether the individual cognitive measures operated the same way across groups, as well as structural invariance to determine whether there were substantive differences in cognitive health across these groups after accounting for any measurement invariance that might be present. So again, measurement invariance asks the question, do the tests behave the same way across groups? And we evaluated this in terms of 3 levels of measurement invariance: configural, metric, and scalar. Configural invariance refers to the factor structure of the measures. That is, do the measures load onto the same factors across groups? And in our case, because of the limited telephone battery, we wanted to estimate a single global cognition factor that was indicated by 4 individual tests: episodic memory, language, attention, and working memory. And we found evidence for configural invariance across all 4 groups. So specifically, a single factor model exhibited adequate fit in all 4 groups. Tests of metric invariance evaluate whether the same indicators are related to the underlying latent factor in the same way. So this analysis examines whether the factor loadings, which are the regression weights of the items onto the latent global cognition factor, are the same across groups. So in other words, do the items correlate with one another in the same way across groups? We tested for metric invariance by comparing the fit of an original configural model in which all factor loadings were estimated freely in each group to a full metric model in which all factor loadings were forced to be the same across groups. And as you can see, the difference in the chi-square fit statistic was not significant, indicating that, yes, the factor loadings are the same across all groups. Forcing those loadings to be the same in all groups did not result in worse model fit. Scalar invariance assesses the equivalence of the individual item scores or intercepts across groups. So in other words, does one group score systematically higher or lower on a particular item for reasons other than different underlying cognitive ability? So we tested for scalar invariance by comparing the fit of the full metric model in which individual item intercepts were allowed to vary across groups to a full scalar model in which these intercepts were forced to be the same in each group. And we found that the fit of this constrained model was significantly worse, pointing to non-invariance or differences across groups. And systematic testing revealed that this was due to non-equivalent intercepts for the animal fluency test only. So specifically, among individuals with the same level of underlying cognitive ability, white participants generated more animals than MENA or Black participants. So in other words, there appeared to be a performance advantage for white participants on the animal fluency test that could not be explained by better underlying cognitive ability. And allowing the animal fluency intercept to vary just for the white group resulted in a model that did not fit significantly worse than the metric model. So that pointed to partial scalar invariance across race and ethnicity. Though the magnitude of this finding, while statistically significant, was small and did not meet standard thresholds for meaningful or salient differential item functioning. Practically, what this means is that researchers should be cautious when looking at raw animal fluency differences between white and non-white older adults, because such comparisons may reflect differences other than underlying cognitive differences. But researchers would be pretty safe if those comparisons were carried out on a global cognitive composite. Now, importantly, there was no non-invariance found between English and Arabic-speaking MENA groups, which means that we did find full measurement invariance across language, which was really the critical validation of those rigorous translation efforts. So next, we wanted to interrogate this kind of more substantive research question about group differences in global cognition while taking into account any identified measurement non-invariance. And this was a fundamental question. Is underlying global cognitive health the same across these 4 groups? And the answer was no. And this was driven by relatively lower cognitive health in both the 2 MENA groups compared to Black and white groups. So this provided some of the first evidence for objectively measured cognitive disparities involving MENA older adults, which again is not attributable to measurement invariance. And our current projects are interrogating the mechanisms underlying these differences. So for example, remember that education level did not differ between MENA participants tested in English and either Black or white groups. But there are likely other socioeconomic or other experiential factors like educational quality, discrimination, immigrant stress that might contribute to these disparities. I'm going to hand it back to Christine now to talk about our current efforts in the Detroit Aging and Memory Project.
Okay, thanks, Laura. So with the goal then of advancing science around cognitive health disparities by obtaining a representative sample for MENA older adults, we initiated the Detroit Aging and Memory Project. This new data collection was launched in 2023 after being delayed because of COVID. And Laura gave you a little bit of background about that and the work we did with the COVID supplement. But the first of its kind, DAMP, which is what we call the Detroit Aging and Memory Project for short, aimed to collect a regionally representative sample from 600 MENA adults aged 65 and older who were living in the Metro Detroit area. Additionally, we leverage an existing sample of Black and white older adults from the Survey of Social Relations, which is a longitudinal study that is led by Dr. Tony Antonucci, our collaborator on this project as well, where individuals began entry into the project in 1992, and they've been followed every 5 to 10 years ever since with very strong measures and rich measures of social relations. And our goal was to compare and contrast the prevalence of AD and the role of structural factors among MENA Americans to other populations in the same geographic area. And one of our major goals is to identify the aspects of social networks that have the greatest effects on cognition and AD risk across racial and ethnic groups. So following DAMP, there are 3 related data collections. There's a genetic supplement, administrative supplement, which is occurring in tandem with DAMP data collection. The COVID supplement, which Laura talked a little bit about, and then the biomarker project, which we refer to as the Healthy Brain Project. So first, I'm going to present the DAMP study aims, followed by the challenges around sampling and the strategies we've adapted to overcome those challenges, and then share some preliminary descriptives just to provide some insight about the sample. We're still in the field collecting data. And then I'm going to turn the screen over to Laura, who'll talk about the Healthy Brain Project. So the aims of DAMP are threefold, and they are presented to do with the aim, they are presented with the goal of the following. First, we want to provide the very first prevalence estimates of this newly visible population. Secondly, we think focusing on the MENA population will allow us to uniquely advance knowledge of the immigrant health. Would allow us to uniquely advance knowledge of immigrant health in the US. A lot of other work that's focused on MENA health outcomes suggests that MENA older adults don't necessarily have an advantage by virtue of their immigrant status, as has often been found with Hispanics, for example. And then finally, we aim to reveal how and why social networks act as, but may also vary as a resource among MENA Black and white older adults, and the differential effects that social networks have on cognitive health. So our measures with regard to, let me just say that this is a 2-hour data collection. So it's very demanding on older adults with regards to their time, and it's perceived as such by the sample that we're trying to recruit. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later. But we have a 1-hour data collection that involves a social survey. So we ask questions about socioeconomic status, health and health behavior, social relations, immigrant factors, stress, and demographics. Then we have an hour of cognitive assessments, which includes the MOCA, category fluency, CRAD, number span, the Benson complex figure, craft story recall, color trails, and verbal fluency. And then we have our physical measures, which include a measure of blood pressure, height and weight are measured, grip strength, and then our saliva sample. Then we ask people who agree to be in the study to tell us who it is that they would identify as what we call an informant, somebody who knows the older adult for at least 10 years. And the goal of recruiting this interview into our study is to be able to have an assessment of the older adult by someone who's known them for a period of time, and to report on whether or not they've noticed any changes. So from that individual, we collect their personal demographics, but then also collect the neuropsychiatric inventory, the IQ code, the functional activities questionnaire, and the quick dementia rating system. So our sampling strategy, we wanted to collect a brand new sample of MENA older adults. We used an area probability sample overlaid with data that we got from the Secretary of State, or I think it's called something else in other states, driver vehicle something. Anyways, we call it Secretary of State here in Michigan. But basically, the driver's license information was our attempt to try to narrow the sample, the households, to those where someone age 65 and older is living. And then we're recruiting the Blacks and whites age 65 and older from the social relations study. For many of these individuals, this will be either the 4th or 5th wave of study participation. And as I mentioned, they began in 1992. The most recent data collection was in 2019. Next slide, sorry. So our sampling strategies, our original assumptions for the MENA sample were as follows. We got all of the addresses that existed in 3 counties. It's called the Tri-County Metro Area of Detroit, Wayne, Oakland, and Macomb County. We got all the addresses from the U.S. Postal Office. And then we randomly selected households to send our letter to let them know about the Detroit Aging and Memory Project, that someone from our team was going to be coming to their house to see if they qualify. We assumed an eligibility rate of 17%. We assumed a screening response rate of 60%, and we assumed a main interview response rate of 74%. The reality was that eligibility rate was about half, only 10%. Screening response rate was also about half, only at 38%. And the main interview response rate was much, much, much lower than what we assumed, at only 29% as opposed to the 74%. So after several months of using this approach, we realized we had to revise if we were going to have any hope of recruiting the sample size that we had proposed. So instead, what we did was focus on what we call super high areas of MENA older adults, and we used a source that our survey research operations folks who we partner with to collect this data oftentimes access as a way to identify ethnicity and age variables for oversampling. And this, we assumed we would have an eligibility rate of 46%. We didn't know, they told us they didn't think the screening and main interview response rate would change much, but we were hopeful that it would. And the reason why we thought it would was because we had a number of other sampling strategies that we used. And starting in August of last year, we made a number of changes. So we made some survey method tweaks. We increased the token of appreciation from $75 to $100. We suggested right up front that even though it's a 2-hour data collection, we can do it in 2 appointments. If 2 hours seems too long, 1 hour, and then we'll come back and do the second hour. We also heavily increased our community outreach. Although we had a community advisory board, we realized that we needed to get the word out about this study in a much more comprehensive way. So we went on numerous radio shows. We used social media. We accessed a lot of the ethnic media, including newspapers and sort of like social media shows, I guess I would call them. They're not quite radio shows. We also hired some community influencers to reach out to resistant lines. So one of the challenges we were having is we went through all this effort to find someone who qualified because they were MENA and 65 and older, but then they were not accepting to be part of the study. So we instituted what we call community influencers who outreach to these resistant lines. You know, the reasons for resistance, I think, are manifold. For the MENA community, there's oftentimes the issue of, you know, when we're screening people, we have the MENA category in there. And most people aren't used to seeing that category because up until March of this year, MENA were categorized as white. So there's oftentimes, since it's a category not traditionally asked about, there's a lot of fear. They didn't understand why they were randomly being identified. They were wary, fearing that maybe they were being surveyed by the government. There's been a long history of that with the MENA population. Also, a conflict in the Middle East broke out while we were in the middle of our data collection, and a lot of community members said, you shouldn't be doing the study now. There's too much stress and too much turmoil. And we countered that with the belief that it's during this time that we really need to make sure the MENA population is included in efforts that are being done to better understand health. And there's also, because they're not traditionally included in research, there really wasn't a clear comprehension of why it's important. What's the benefit? There has to be a tangible benefit to them. So we had to develop ways of talking about why this study was going to be of benefit to them and future generations. And then generally speaking, just with older adults, especially in the post-COVID world, there's fear about a lot of scams. And so we had to overcome those fears as well. So even though we did all of these efforts to try to boost participation using our area probability sampling methods, they helped, but they weren't enough. So we transitioned to what we're calling community engaged sampling. So we're very proud that we were able to collect over 220 people using the address-based sampling approach, but we're falling way short of our sample size goal. As a result, we made a shift, and this community engaged sampling was a purposeful approach to ensure representation from diverse communities. So a little bit different than convenience sampling. We partnered with 19 organizations that represented the diversity of the Metro Detroit MENA community, including churches, mosques, community organizations, and schools. We stressed the benefits of participation, having to convey tangible benefits. We were going to learn about how to avoid Alzheimer's disease from the study. We're going to learn about how to age with grace. And finally, we're going to have data for community needs. The MENA population, as we've mentioned, is not very rarely the focus of data collections. And so there's very little data on MENA populations. So in partnering with these organizations, we have been attending community events weekly for the last several months. And by attending these weekly events, we've leveraged cultural capital to build trust and overcome resistance. So just to give you a little snapshot, we now have 442 people who've been identified for our sample, 222 who are part of the area probability sample. We've got 86 from our SRS panel, who are the blacks and whites in our sample. And then from our community engaged sampling, we've gotten 134. So it took us over a year to get 220. In a matter of 2.5 months, we've gotten 134. You can see that the age distribution is pretty comparable across all of the samples. With regards to education, for both the area probability sample and the community engaged sample, on average, the education levels are lower than what you see in the SRS panel, which is approximately 16 years of education is about a college education. The MENA sample is at high school or less. You can see there's a little bit of a difference with regards to the proportion who are female, with the community engaged sample reflecting more what we would expect in terms of the older population, at least what's present in the American Community Survey data, whereas our newly screened sample biases towards males. You can see that the MENA sample is heavily immigrant, 91% of the probability sample, 71% of the community engaged sample, and they're about equally partnered. And just in terms of country of origin, very quickly, the country of origin reflects what we would expect based on the American Community Survey data. The top 3 countries of origin are Lebanon, Iraq, and Yemen, and that reflects what we see nationally and in Metro Detroit. And then finally, in terms of language of interview, we have the majority of our area probability sample wanting to do the data collection in Arabic, about 72%, almost 3/4, whereas about half of the community engaged sample are saying they want to do it in Arabic. I will say all of those with ancestry to Yemen and Palestine have chosen Arabic. Not one of them has done it in English. And then this is very, very preliminary data, but we now have the MOCA, the entire MOCA administered to the population. And you can see that in general, the MENA population, which is indicated by the blue and the gray bars, the blue bar being the area probability sample, the gray bar being the community engaged sample, their MOCA score is quite a bit lower than what we find in SRS. And please note that the SRS, that's combined blacks and whites. And we did not control for education. So this is very preliminary, but we just wanted to show you, what we have so far. And we're hoping to do more elaborate analyses as our data collection is finalized. So I'm going to turn it over to Laura.
So the Healthy Brain Project study aims in a lot of ways mirror the aims of the parent study. So they have a mix of between group and within group aims. The first aim is a between group question. So can differences in brain health explain any group differences in dementia prevalence that will be identified through the cognitive and functional assessments carried out in the parent study? Aim 2 is a within group aim. So among MENA older adults, this aim focuses on the role of immigrant and cultural factors, such as year of migration, which can be a proxy for changing immigration policies, ethnic discrimination, living in an ethnic enclave, etc. So this aim is going to test competing hypotheses that these immigrant and cultural factors influence cognitive health through brain health, independent of brain health, or by modifying associations between brain health and cognitive health in line with the concept of cognitive reserve or resilience. And finally, aim 3 is a mix of between and within group questions. So we're interested in how social network structure and support quality across different types of relationships may relate to brain health within the whole sample, as well as within racial and ethnic subgroups. So to measure brain health, we're collecting a variety of MRI biomarkers to assess both gray and white matter integrity, as well as the integrity of the cerebrovasculature. And we're obtaining venous blood, both for pathological biomarker quantification, specifically amyloid and tau, as well as unbiased quantitative proteomics via mass spec. So this latter approach is exciting because it's going to allow us to identify both known proteins like neurofilament light and potentially novel proteins that are altered in individuals with dementia. And I think this data-driven discovery approach is particularly important given that the extant literature on ADRD biomarkers has not yet focused on this population. So right now we're in the thick of recruitment, kind of paralleling the parent study. So to date, 86% of DAMP participants have agreed to be contacted about additional research. A bottleneck in getting them in for the biomarker sub-study has been getting back in touch with them. And I also want to note that many individuals have only participated in the blood draw portion of the study due to MRI ineligibility. So to address challenges, we're now diversifying our contact methods. So specifically, we're attempting to re-engage participants via mail and also in-person home visits. Travel has been another challenge. So while the parent study can take place right in participants' homes or in any location of their choosing, the biomarker sub-study necessarily requires travel to the Michigan Alzheimer's Disease Research Center and MRI facility. So we do offer free transportation for all participants, but leaving the home or leaving the neighborhood where people feel comfortable has been a big barrier. We've also encountered a fair amount of anxiety, specifically about the MRI, less so about the blood draw, which is probably more familiar to people. So we've been offering a lot of psychoeducation, both to participants and to their families. But many participants are opting out of MRI, even when they do agree to the blood draw. And I think this is a really important point because it underscores the importance and the great potential of blood-based AD biomarkers for more population representative and more inclusive ADRD research. And finally, as I alluded to before, we have found that participants aren't always the ones that need convincing. Many participants immediately involve their extended family in conversations about participating in research, and our staff routinely communicates with sometimes multiple family members on several different occasions before an appointment can be secured. So I can't emphasize enough how important it is to have recruiters who not only have cultural capital, but who are also well-versed in the details and the benefits of research. And we're grateful to have some really phenomenal staff members working with us on this project. So in the last few moments, I wanted to take this opportunity to talk about our center, the Michigan Center for Contextual Factors in Alzheimer's Disease. This is an NIA-funded resource center for minority aging research that focuses on the MENA community. And I wanted to present some information about our center because we have several opportunities open to the larger research community that you or your colleagues may be interested in. So as one of our overarching goals is to contribute to the development of a workforce of future leaders, we have an enrichment program for postdocs or faculty. They don't have to be from Michigan. And that enrichment program includes pilot funding, a monthly seminar series, access to an interdisciplinary mentorship team, analytic consultations, mock grant reviews, and more. So the request for applications typically comes out in October. So please check our website or contact one of us if you might be interested. Another one of our center goals is to engage Arab American and MENA communities in research. So we have a lot of community events and we're building a research volunteer directory that you can apply to access if you're interested in recruiting MENA individuals into your study. So we currently have a diverse group of about 700 MENA adults in the directory, and we would encourage you to explore this resource. So I want to really specially acknowledge our collaborator, Dr. Tony Antonucci, and our project manager, Noor Fakhouri. And I'd like to thank the NIA for funding these efforts to make ADRD research more inclusive by engaging with the MENA community. And I want to thank you all for attending and for your attention today.
Well, thank you very much. This is Dallas Anderson again. I'm going to be leading on the Q&A. And if you don't mind, I'll start with my own question, and that has to do with the fact that the MENA group has been officially categorized as white, but have they been subjected to discrimination and something, that we might call racism? What would be their life, particularly in the Detroit area, which I'm more familiar with?
When you say what would be their life,
Would they, if you talk to them about, their struggles or challenges in everyday life, would they disclose anything? That'd be one thing to disclose it to somebody who's obviously from the community, but to an outsider like yourself, would they be forthcoming with information like that? Kind of think of it as a sensitive question.
Yeah. So Dallas, just to clarify, are you asking would they be willing to share experiences of discrimination or just in general things about their health?
Well, I mean, I guess there could be two things there.
Okay.
The willingness to share with outsiders
Yeah.
information, and the other is
Well,
that special information about their experience, perhaps with, discrimination,
yeah,
that kind of
yeah.
thing.
Well, I mean, that's an excellent question. I mean, that's one of the challenges we have faced in terms of convincing people who are eligible for the study to actually participate, because there's a lot of privacy and a lot of fear about sharing information, especially personal information. And this is one of the reasons why I think the community engaged recruitment is so important. So, and the cultural capital is really important. So, I think having someone on your team who's from that community and who's has a clear leadership role is very helpful in building trust and overcoming fears, just in general, in terms of sharing private information. But then I think there's also a cultural nuance there where talking about private matters just isn't done with strangers. So even though we have a bilingual interview team who are culturally similar to the individuals that we're recruiting into the new probability sample, and even into the community engaged sample, there is that effort of trying to overcome the norm of privacy. And that's one of the reasons why we've spent a lot of effort trying to convey what the benefit is of research participation. What can it do for the community? And I don't think that can be underscored enough. I think it's really important, especially for this community, to hear about why they should be willing to talk about themselves to strangers. And getting a very concrete, community-friendly explanation of why research is beneficial is very badly needed. In terms of discrimination, we do have those questions in our Detroit Aging and Memory Project survey. We didn't ask about it, I don't think, in the COVID supplement. That was a very short data collection. It was a 30-minute telephone interview. But from previous research, what we know is that MENA Americans do report high levels of discrimination, and it varies by immigrant status. Paradoxically, it's the US born who report higher levels of discrimination than immigrants. And there could be a lot of reasons as to why that's the case. I think for US born, they may feel a little bit more secure in their American citizenship and identity, and be more willing to admit to it. Or conversely, it could be they're just more aware of it. For immigrants who are here, they're oftentimes leaving situations that are very bad, and coming to the US is kind of like a new lease on life, and it doesn't matter how people treat them, they're just happy to be in the US. So I mean, I think there's a lot of reasons why there might be that difference. But it is clear from the little bit of research that we have done that discrimination experiences definitely are there, and that's one of the reasons why I think the OMB was convinced to separate out or disaggregate MENA from the white category, because their experiences oftentimes don't mirror the white experience.
So I think, in thinking back to our conversations with our community partner board, I do remember one question that I think was originally in the survey with the intention of kind of proxying acculturation. It was a question about, do you send money back to individuals in your home country? It's a question for immigrants. And I remember our community partner board really questioned that. Why are you asking about where we're sending money? And I think we ultimately removed that question from the survey.
Yeah, we did.
I think it's really important to vet your measures with your community partner board thoroughly and really be responsive to their feedback, because you don't want to, compromise trust in any way.
Well, thank you very much. That was very enlightening. We have a number of questions. Let's just try to go through them as quickly as we can. The first one, Kathleen McIntyre. Kathleen, did you want to ask your question?
Dallas, she can't unmute herself. It's a
Oh,
webinar.
okay. Okay, then I will read it. From Kathleen, why do you believe that they were able to perform better at CAMEL compared to other tasks, even if they were American-born MENA individuals?
Yeah, so I'll just clarify that in the MOCA pilot study, all 33 individuals were immigrants. So they all were born in the Arab world. So it, probably has to do with their familiarity with animals in that part of the world. Yeah, so it remains to be seen if this finding replicates in the non-immigrant sample that we're collecting.
Yeah.
It's a
They
good
were not
question.
just immigrants, all those interviews were in Arabic.
Yes, and they were all in Arabic.
Yeah.
Very good. Let's move on. A question from Marian Shahid Basanti. For country of origin, I noticed Egypt was not listed. Have you tried community outreach to the Coptic Egyptian Christian community in Michigan?
Yeah, Egypt was not listed because it wasn't one of the top 5. However, we do have Egyptians in our sample. But we would love to reach out to the to the Coptic community in Michigan. That would be great. Marion, if you have a connection that you can tell us about, I'd be happy to reach out to them personally. But we do have Egyptians in our sample. They just they weren't the top 5. And just to also underscore that the American Community Survey data also suggests, although Egyptians are quite prominent nationally in terms of their presence in the U.S., in the Metro Detroit area, they are not the most numerous national origin group.
Okay. Next question from Shreya Chakraborty. Fantastic effort and presentation. Are you able to recruit the MENA population to AD clinical trials? What are the challenges? Do you know if there are similar efforts ongoing for populations of Indian, Pakistani, Bangladeshi origin?
Yeah, that's a great question. What that brings to mind is, so in McFadden, we had a RICMAR scientist, Hala Darwish. She's in the School of Nursing at the University of Michigan, and her pilot project was a clinical trial. She was attempting to recruit MENA immigrants into a purely behavioral intervention. It was a combined CBT and cognitive training intervention for folks with MCI, and she faced tremendous challenges. And I know right now she's engaged in a qualitative data collection to try to answer this question, what are the major barriers? And, equally importantly, how can we address those barriers? I think, part of it was the demands of the data collection, because it was a behavioral intervention, there were a lot of visits involved. But yeah, I think it's different having someone come in for an observational study, one visit versus a more intensive clinical trial regime. So that I think that's something that we're actively investigating. And then the question about similar efforts in other populations. I don't have an answer locally, but I know the Rutgers group is working with that population. I saw later on in the Q&A someone mentioning that they're doing such a data collection targeting South Asian populations in New Jersey. So I think, yes, that those efforts are going on, but I'm not personally involved with them.
Okay, thank you. Moving on. This question from Sandra Talavera. Have reasons for study participant MRI barriers been identified?
Yeah, I think some of the barriers to the biomarker study in general are around travel, kind of coming to Ann Arbor. So Ann Arbor is not the enclave, the ethnic enclave. And it's not just a matter of providing transportation. It's more psychological than logistical. But even then, when we can have people agree to travel here for the blood draw, they often are very resistant to the MRI. And part of that is just unfamiliarity, and that can be overcome with education. There are no X-rays, there's no radiation, it's not invasive. That helps to a certain extent, but I think there's also anxiety about being in the MRI tube and the claustrophobia. So we're really encouraging people to try it out for as long as they can. We do have a 45-minute scan, but that's broken up into multiple sequences. So if we can get people to stay in the scanner for 7 minutes, we can get all the gray matter volumes. So we're really trying to be flexible and work with people and make them feel comfortable. We've worked on gender matching our examiner with the participant. Folks at our MRI center, the participants do have to change into scrubs to get into the scanner. So gender matching has been something to make folks more comfortable. But we do continue to see new challenges every day, and we're trying to overcome them as they come up.
Thank you. Next question. Actually, it's a multi-part question. I'll read you the statement. My name is Karen Kai from Rutgers Alzheimer's Research Center. We initiated a cohort study targeting MENA and South Asian populations in New Jersey. My questions are, number one, how do you confirm MENA identity during your screening process? We found mixed ethnicity and ancestry uncertainty is not uncommon. That's the first question. And then I'll give you the second question.
Yeah. We have a screening question where we ask people to indicate their ancestry. And then we include MENA in the list of US Census official categories, which includes the 5 racial categories and the Hispanic Latino category. And if anyone says that they're of MENA ancestry, they immediately screen in to the study. And sometimes they won't say they're MENA, they'll say they're white. So we've added another level of screening where if someone says they're white, we ask them what the ancestry is of their mother and of their father. And if either their mother or their father's ancestry is MENA, then they screen into the study as MENA.
Okay, here's the second question. It's very interesting to see that in your DAMP, 30% of subjects report their country of origin is USA instead of other MENA countries. Can you explain that a little bit more?
Yeah, maybe that title was a little misleading. It was country of birth. So the 30% are those who were born in the US. That's why we had 30% USA.
Okay. The next question, well, it's just a comment. It's from Alice Nono Dujatsa. Thanking you for the great presentation on the MENA community. Next, from Layla Ben Hashimi. Wonderful work. Greatly appreciate your efforts to include MENA populations in this research. 2 questions. The first one, have you examined relationships with self-reported trauma or chronic stress exposures and their cognitive outcomes?
I would say that in our DAMP questionnaire, we do have questions that will capture stress exposure. Self-reported trauma, I'm not sure what definition they mean with regards to self-reported trauma, but I think some of the questions we ask about life experiences, and I think some of them would be considered traumatic. So we will have the opportunity to do that once data collection is completed.
Very good. Her second question, are there efforts to include individuals from non-Arabic speaking MENA countries? Many of these folks have similar migrant stories due to political turmoil.
Yes, we do. We also extend the MENA to Iranian ancestry, but only if they speak English, because we don't have anything translated into Farsi or into Persian. But that's the extent of it.
Okay. Another comment. This is from Wen Meyer. Just a comment that this presentation was fantastic and the work is so important. Next, from Maria Bunyan. Do you think that being nervous, anxious about research more prevalent among the MENA participants could lead to participants performing slightly worse on tests, for example, MOCA? Might this slightly contribute to results and bias findings?
That's a great question. There's, only so much we can do there in terms of, measuring anxiety with our available questionnaires, but I think this is a big problem with a lot of research. And, oftentimes people talk about practice effects and they're very worried about practice effects and people getting better with repeated exposure. But I think what we're more concerned about is not, inflated performance on subsequent tests, but rather underperformance on the baseline tests. I think this is absolutely true and really can best be solved through repeated assessment. So we'd love to get people in for a second visit to investigate this more thoroughly because it's a great point. Yeah, I mean, we really try our best to make people as comfortable as possible, seeing them in their homes. We start with the social survey to build rapport before we launch into the cognitive measures, but there's only so much we can do. So I think this is an important point that we should all be paying attention to.
Okay, thank you. Next, a comment from and a question from Alice Nono Jijatsa. I'm new here and would like to know if there are similar studies for immigrants from French-speaking countries in Africa.
I don't know the answer to that
Yeah.
question, Laura. Do you?
Nothing comes up. No, I'm sorry.
Okay.
But maybe that's a topic for a future webinar in this series.
Yeah, I was going to say maybe this is something that NIA should be thinking about.
Yeah.
I guess the last question from Sandra Talavera. How does team communicate benefits of research participation in the community?
We do this in multiple ways. I mean, we've done it through our media appearances. We've done it by having town hall meetings with different communities within Metro Detroit and talking about what the benefits are. First and foremost, one of the things we stress is that having MENA populations included in efforts like these are going to allow us to uniquely identify what it is that protects community members from ADRD and what puts them at risk. And when we say uniquely, it's the idea that recognizing that MENA experiences are unique and cultural lifestyle behaviors are unique and stratification, racism experiences are unique. So our idea is to be able to tell them that it's really going to help the community to understand how to protect themselves into the future. And although it may not benefit them tomorrow, it will in the near future, and it will particularly have effects for their children and grandchildren. And of course, we believe that this will also benefit the field in terms of being able to, sometimes when you focus on populations that aren't normally included in research projects, you learn things that can be helpful for everybody, not just the community of interest. So, we do a lot of work to try to convey the benefits of research participation in the community.
I think there's, some synergy between our community liaison and recruitment core through McFadden and have our separate research data collections that we're doing. Because I'm just thinking about McFadden's community health events. This is a huge theme that we really stress when we're giving information to the community. What is the latest information on Alzheimer's disease? We're always, really careful to stress that. And the reason we know this is through research, and because people like you agreed to participate in research studies. We wouldn't know all this information without that. So, I think that's one way that the McFadden's efforts are hopefully laying the groundwork for other data collections. And just, practically, I think, we had someone create the 3 reasons why flyer, which is like a super simple graphic that we've disseminated on social media and in pamphlet form. Our interviewers bring that 3 reasons why card with them when they visit homes. So I guess the kind of main point is that we're trying to make this point in every way we can in multiple methods at multiple points of contact, because it has to be integral at every phase of communication, because this is really a fundamental barrier.
Thank you. Well, I spoke too soon that we have at least a couple more comments here. Here's one from David Brott. Have you all thought about developing or already developed standard operating procedures for the community engaged sampling?
We are very much thinking about this. This is something that we're developing as we go. And we do plan to write all of this up and hope that it will be helpful for other groups who are hoping to, engage with hard to reach populations. I don't think that what we're experiencing is necessarily unique to MENA, but I think what we're learning from the MENA can be helpful, can be helpful not just for this population, but for others as well. So we hope to be able to have that published in the near future.
And we do have, so there was a special issue organized by the RICMAR network several years ago. And I know we have an article in that special issue that presented kind of our earliest experiences engaging with the community and some of our lessons learned there. Not so much for recruitment into research, because that was really just, our first several years of just meeting the community and providing information. But I know we learned a lot in that publication. Do you remember what journal that was in, Christine?
Yeah, it was an
ethnicity and disease.
Yeah.
Just to continue with David Brought's thought, and that was on the SOPs. He was saying even something like key lessons learned from the development process of framing how research benefits you and your community type communications would be very helpful for a larger for a lot of larger cohorts experiencing similar decreased responses, participation rates.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we the thing to recognize is that our challenges are I think magnified because of some of the complexities of the MENA category and the experiences of MENA Americans. But one thing to note is post-COVID, response rates for studies like this have plummeted. I mean, the US Census, as an example, generally they get over 90% response rate. Post-COVID, their response rates went down to 70%. And that's supposed to be a mandatory, it's a mandatory survey. People are supposed to, they're obligated to fill it out, and still response rates went down. And this has been true of other nationally representative data collections that focus on aging and older adults. Whereas response rates used to be 76%, they've gone down to 49%. I mean, it's a problem industry wide, but I think it's heightened in the MENA category because of the immigrant factors that we're trying to overcome. So I agree, this could be helpful to a lot of people, and it's definitely something that we're working on.
Mm-hmm. I guess the final point comes from one of my colleagues, Michael Benini. Just a second. He writes, to the comment out of Rutgers, New Jersey, populations from North Africa are genetically very highly admixed, including Arab, Black African, European, Eurasian, and Berber. The latter including ancestries from China and Mongolia. So some of the admixture might still represent a genuine MENA North African ancestry. I don't know. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think he's just talking about French-speaking Africa as being very genetically mixed.
Yeah. Okay. We can endorse that.
Yeah.
Well, I think we've reached the end here. I thank you both again.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Camille, Dallas, and Damali for organizing this. It was a pleasure to be part of this. Really enjoyed having an opportunity to share our project, and again, honored to be part of this series.
Yes, thank you so much. Thank you so much to our presenters. Once again, Dr. Zahadni and Dr. Ajrush for taking the time to present on this very important topic. It was very highly engaged discussion we just had. So thank you so much for the time. We also do want to let everyone know that our next iteration of this webinar series will be in November. So please stay tuned for that. We will be joined by Dr. Bei Wu from New York University, and she will be presenting on her work with oral health and disparities in diverse older populations. Yes. So thank you so much, Dallas. Was there something you wanted to say?
No, we can't say thank you enough. We really appreciate it. But that's it. Thank you.
Thank
Okay,
you.
thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great rest of your day.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.